A couple of weeks ago, Father, you referenced there is a Greco-Roman view of judgment and a Hebrew view of judgment, with the Hebrew view recognizing more complexity in judgment. Can you quickly summarize the essence of these two viewpoints as they have influenced our Western concept of judgment? Thank you. This is Sue from Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, so what is the difference and why is there a difference? And does it matter?
Yeah, in the Hebrew view, right, there's not a separation of the law, the systemic law per se, from the actual person. In Greek and Roman thought, right, the law is the law and it's over here, and the person is the person and they're over here, and the law kind of issues this verdict on the person. I mean, Torah, the law in Hebrew, right, is a very interpersonal thing, right? The rabbis carry the law in their hearts, right? Torah is a reflection of the heart of God, right? So in a way, you know, you have this fusing, which is rather foreign to us, actually, a fusing of the personal side of, you know, us with the kind of legal prescription in the Hebrew viewpoint. So when you start thinking about judgment, right? Well, you are judged according to the law, but you're actually not judged like a human court where you just say, well, here's the law, here's the prescription, you violated it, you go to jail. That's not what happens, for, as it were, in the Hebrew view. It's almost as if God is dialoguing with us all the time, sees the inner parts of our heart, sees our motives better than anybody can see our motives, can enter in with his compassion to draw our true selves forward. And this is in the midst of the judgment, right? So God's judgment is going to be filled with compassion, filled with knowledge of us, filled with trying to draw our true selves out of us beyond all the various filters that we have and all the things we've developed. God's judgment is so rich, it's so thick, it's so dense, right? It's so interpersonal, it's so filled with compassion and love, right? It's not, as it were, the gavel coming down, guilty. Mm-hmm. It's not that simple. In fact, it's so complex, sometimes Jesus has to warn us like dozens of times in the New Testament, don't judge your brother or sister. Why is he so insistent on this? Because we can't judge like God judges. We can't judge like a legal prescription. We can't say, he did something wrong, he's a sinner. You can't even say that. All you can say is that you respectfully leave judgment to the God who really knows, to God who knows the inner heart, to God who knows not only the inner heart and the true motive, but to God who's dragging the true motive and the goodness of our inner hearts out of us, to God whose compassionate heart is unconditional and unrestricted. Leave judgment to him. Mm-hmm. And of course, the idea then, is we're so incapable of doing that for Jesus that we shouldn't even attempt it. And that's why he says, the one thing he says is, be careful how you judge, because the measure with which you measure will be the measure measured out to you. And the reason he's saying that is not because, of course, God's really going to go ahead and just judge you according to the strict measure you use, but he's trying to warn you, don't do this, because if you do this, you so limit the judgment of God. You so restrict the love of God. You have no right to do it. You have no right to speak on behalf of God's judgment. Best thing to do is respectfully let God do the judging and you do the praying. And that's basically, and the forgiving.
Right. And that's, let me ask you that, Father.
Jesus asks.
Because we hear that a lot, and obviously our present Holy Father in this year of mercy has made that point. I think sometimes people do get a little confused when they kind of say, well, I can't judge. Well, how can I ever be a law? and how can anything be wrong if I can't judge? I'm confused. Explain.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Doug. You can't judge persons. That's what Jesus is saying. That's that judgment, right, where that I've been just talking about, which requires really the compassion and the knowledge, the interpersonal knowledge of God. That you cannot do. But you can judge a thing like a prescript or an action or something of that nature. So, for example, you could say that that action doesn't correspond to, the Torah. You can certainly say that. So you can say, well, that's a sinful action. What you can't say is, that's a sinful person who committed the sinful action. You just have to stop and let God figure out whether the person is sinful, whether God who knows the motives, whether God who can step into the consciousness, whether God who can judge with infinite compassion is going to say that's a sinful person. We can't do that, but we can say, oh, that action was sinful according to the definition of law. That's merely an analytical judgment, right? But that's not what's being talked about when we say, well, we're going to be judged by God when we get to heaven. That's an interpersonal judgment, very different from an analytical judgment.
Right, and that's an important distinction for our audience, for people to understand when they hear certain statements like this.